Hello everyone, and welcome to the month-late review about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Well, I sure took my time making this. It's been over a month since I beat Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I wanted to make the review earlier, but here we are. This game is, quite frankly, amazing. It was my first single-player Final Fantasy game, and it is so fun. But let's start with the most important aspect of the game, which is, of course, the gameplay. Gameplay in Final Fantasy VII Remake is very different from the original. Instead of having an active time battle system, this game opts for a real-time hack-and-slash gameplay style. The combat is fluid, nothing ever broke, and most importantly, it feels satisfying. The difficulty levels ramp up too. Easy is pretty nice all the way through, and offers a slight challenge, but not so much as to overwhelm a casual player. Normal starts off pretty easy, but gets very challenging near the end. Hard mode, which is only unlocked after beating the game and unlocking the chapter select, is extremely tough and you can't use items, period. The range of difficulties makes the game very accessible as well as an extreme challenge for those looking for it, which is a big positive in my book. How the system works is throughout a battle, the ATB meter will fill. Once it reaches 1 or 2 full bars, you can use special attacks on any of the characters. The bar fills on its own, but is also filled faster by attacking enemies. Nothing transfers from one fight to another, including the ATB meter and limit breaks, and you can't use summons whenever you want, which is one of the only things I don't like about this battle system. Plenty of weapons, armor, and items can increase your stats, as well as slotting the right material where you need it. This can drastically increase your weapon stats and make the difference in hard mode. Every single weapon can be upgraded using this Galaxy Solar System type upgrade path. Each level you get nets you SP, which can be applied to all your weapons. The base stats of the weapon are balanced perfectly, so no weapon is truly better than the others until you upgrade it. Using all of the weapons is important as well, as it'll earn you new skills once you have used them enough with their respective weapon. So once you have become proficient in every weapon skill, you will become quite literally unstoppable. And this isn't just for Cloud. Every character you can play as has a ton of weapons to gain, upgrade, and learn. Speaking of playable characters, there are only 4 in this game. If we're going off the original, there should be 5, but Red 13 comes in way too late to be a fully playable and upgradable character. We'll just have to wait for Final Fantasy VII Remake 2 to come out to play as him. The playable characters are Cloud, Barret, Tifa, and Aerith. Cloud uses swords, bats, and clubs. Barret uses guns for the most part, with an occasional melee weapon. Tifa is a melee character with her fists, and Aerith is mostly support and the weakest character overall. I was surprised to find myself using Tifa more than any other character, as she can output so much damage that using Barret or Aerith would be less efficient. Of course, each character has her strengths, and air combat with melee characters is just not good. It's not fun, and there's only one combo you can really use. That's where Barret's long-range attacks come in, or spells. Magic returns in this game in the same way it did in the original, but it's now tied to the ATB meter. Oh, and along with that, a few limit breaks from the original have been turned into normal attacks, like Braver for Cloud, and others have been kept the same as a limit break like the Cross Slash. From this point onwards, there will be heavy and unrelenting spoilers for both the plot of Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake, so if you still want to play these games spoiler-free, go do it. They're literally on every system. So let's get to the story. The plot of Final Fantasy VII Remake only follows the Midgar portion from the original, so some parts are stretched way too long, but let's start from the beginning. The game opens differently from the first, opting for an expansive look at life topside in Midgar while showing the destruction Shinra has caused around the city, i.e. the desert, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense given the world map from the original, But, you know, a different interpretation doesn't have to be the same. I'm not going to explain characters or anything, I'm pretty sure everyone's already familiar with them. Finally, we get to the iconic intro to the original game, now expanded even more, showing a little bit of the disregard for nature within Midgar, before panning out to the Shinra building, and then we zoom back into Mako Reactor 1 where the bombing mission is happening. I should mention how good the cuts between cutscene and gameplay are. The graphics are so good you might not even be able to tell at first. The story continues normally until after you escape Mako Reactor 1. In this version, the bomb didn't destroy the whole reactor, so President Shinra and Heidegger have to step in to finish Avalanche's work. The walk through Sector 8 is much longer this time, and then you meet Sephiroth. Sephiroth is my main issue with the game, how he was handled mostly. He's a well-known villain, but what made him so great was the mystery behind him. You barely got to see him, but now he shows up every few chapters in the game, which is only a few hours in this 25-hour-long game. Now, there is a new mystery that we'll get to with him later, but for now, stuff is a bit weird. When Cloud makes it to Aerith, plot ghosts called Whispers are attacking her. Their only function is to keep the story going the way it's supposed to, literally. Pretty much a metaphor for, you know, the original fans of Final Fantasy VII who don't want any changes to the story. Which, I don't know, I could go either way, honestly. I don't care. I haven't even finished the original yet. The game keeps going, and as with the first two chapters, everything is expanded. Even a completely new part takes you to the Sector 7 plate was added, and Roche. The section's real intention was to add an actual character to Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge, who had about 20 lines in the original game before biting the dust. It's such a fun time, and the backstories they provide continue even after the characters shift into the back of the story. The real plot picks back up when the Whispers come in force to injure Jessie, as she was about to go with the main crew on the second bombing mission, and they weren't gonna need Cloud. When she got injured, Barrett hired Cloud back up on the team. The Sector 5 Reactor mission is the longest part of the game by far, taking up 3 whole chapters. One for the train, one for getting into the reactor, and one for the airbuster and getting out. This section drags out the game at least 3 hours longer than it needed to be, and is the first portion that really needed to be paced better. When Cloud falls after the airbuster fight, Sephiroth shows up again, in the one and only time I would have actually wanted Sephiroth in the game, and it was just so cool. Just like a little notice that, hey, Sephiroth's here, but you still don't know what's going on with him. And then they spend a chapter focusing on Cloud, Aerith, Reno, and the Turks. Rude and Reno are some of the best characters in this game. As I see it, Rude is like John Wick and The Rock, but way more serious than they need to be, and then he also gets really flustered when anybody makes fun of the fact that he's constantly doing one-liners and stuff. Reno's just really fast, and his boss fight was pretty good, but mostly only the second time through, because on my first attempt and playthrough, I hadn't got into spells much at that point. After that, you spend a good amount of time with Aerith in both Sectors 5 and 6. Wall Market is absolutely the best part of the game. Everything is so over the top in there. You got the gym, the Coliseum, Don Corneo's mansion, and of course the Honeybee Inn. After the meeting with Don Corneo, you're in the sewers, and this is where a lot of the pacing problems pick up in full force. You've just learned that the Sector 7 plate is going to drop, and the whole time you're both in the sewers and at the train graveyard, there's not a very big sense of intensity or urgency. Unlike the original game where both of these sections were very short, taking less than 10 minutes to get through both of them combined, this drags out for 2 whole hours, a ridiculous amount of time for what was pretty much 0 in the original game. The train graveyard is really where a lot of the problems lie. On subsequent playthroughs, it's a little better, but plenty of it is just very confusing to get through. Finally, the plate drops. The climb up the pillar and the immediate aftermath are really the most intense parts of the game, and it's great. and when the dust settles, more and more of Shinra's atrocities are laid bare. Of course, right after the plate falling is supposed to be the climb to Shinra HQ, but instead we get an entire chapter of tons of side quests and finding out that Wedge survived. Then we get another chapter about going back through the sewers under Corneo's mansion to get one last backstory in for an arbitrary character that nobody cares about but will probably be important in the sequel. Finally, we get to climbing the plate. It's pretty climactic, but it goes on just a little too long for my liking. I wish they would just, shorten it a bit, take out a lot of the fat that was on there. And also fix the background. The background looked terrible in that level. And then it's on to Shinra HQ, one of the best parts of the game. It's paced great and gives so much insight onto how Shinra works. Hojo gets some nice development. Palmer is portrayed great, which makes me excited for his boss fight in part 2. Reeve seems to have some pretty different things to say than in the original, seemingly being the only good person at Shinra, it seems. It makes me wonder how they'll do Kate Sith in the sequel. The Shinra VR Planetarium is great too. It creates one of the coolest shots in the game with Cloud and Sephiroth. Then Mayor Domino comes in and out of the story really fast and you make your way to the meeting of the director's board. This is great for setting up Reeve to be even more important than in the original in more ways than one. And it's also great development for members of the Shinra High Committee that didn't get much development in the Midgar section of the original game. Finally, you rescue Aerith from Hojo's lab, and in the process of that, free Red 13, who only joins your party as a guest member because the game's almost over. Or is it? Now we come to the drum. It's a completely new section and the worst part of the game. It's paced poorly, breaks any excitement or tension there was, and it's only because they introduced Red 13 so late they couldn't have him just be there for an hour. He had to be there for at least 2.5. When you finally make your way up to the top of the Shinra building, things start to go haywire. So you find President Shinra hanging off the edge of his helipad, seemingly thrown there by someone or something. So Barrett basically has everything he wanted. He holds Shinra hostage as he runs inside and grabs a gun. Well, Shinra grabs a gun, and then he runs inside, and it's like, now we have a Mexican standoff between Barrett and President Shinra, and they're both just like, come on, do it, do it, do it. But then Sephiroth comes and kills the President and Barrett. But then you fight Genova for literally no reason, except that's a callback to how Sephiroth just appears, and then you fight Genova for absolutely no reason in the original, and then the Whispers bring Barrett back to life, and then they're swarming the Shinra building because Sephiroth killed Barrett. Then Rufus Shinra enters and exits the story in about 5 minutes, and then Motorcycle Section Part 2, and it's pretty fun. Finally, we get to the end of the road. Literally. Sephiroth shows up, and now we skip from the finale of Part 1 all the way to the end of Part 3. Not literally, but everything goes from a 4 to a 10 in about 3 seconds. Sephiroth breaks a hole in reality and everyone heads through it. You defeat Destiny itself and then Harbinger Sephiroth. And that's the end. Everyone is looking out on the horizon waiting for the sequel. Let's talk about some things. Mainly Sephiroth. As confirmed by the Final Fantasy VII Remake Ultimania, there are 4 Sephiroths in this game. Memory Sephiroth, one that only Cloud can see and is basically a hallucination that has nothing to do with actual Sephiroth. Genova Sephiroth, which is kind of what Sephiroth did in the original game to mess with the group, using like the Genova clones or Sephiroth clones to move around and stuff. Then there's Harbinger Sephiroth, which is when Sephiroth absorbs the power of the Whisper Harbinger to create an actual physical form, and a Mystery Sephiroth, one that is an absolute and complete mystery. So I don't think anyone would have guessed that there are that many different Sephiroths in the game. I get that they wanted to do something different with the character, but this is just really confusing. Also, it may be possible that Aerith in the remake is actually the Aerith from the original by possessing her past self's body from the live stream and creating a divergent timeline, which effectively makes this a sequel rather than an actual remake. What the heck, Square Enix? Why did you have to do this to the game? I mean, that doesn't really affect my score, but just is really confusing for new-time players. I had to watch so many videos to get it, and also kinda spoil the original game a bit, which that's not something you really want to do. But my final score for Final Fantasy VII Remake? Well, it has a lot going for it, but it also has some glaring issues in the pacing and the graphical departments. With that in mind, I give Final Fantasy VII Remake an 8 out of 10. See you guys in the next video. Goodbye.